I never told anyone that I actually make $150,000 a month. Michael and I had been together for over a year, and we decided to get married. When it was time to meet his family in their Chicago home, I wanted to play a little game. I pretended to be a simple girl from a small town in the countryside. But the moment I stepped into their house, I never told anyone that I actually make $150,000 a month. Not a soul. It's my one deeply guarded secret in a life lived otherwise completely out in the open. It's the kind of number that changes things, changes how people look at you, and in my experience, never for the better. From the outside, my life probably looks like a New York City fever dream. I live in a Soho loft with floor-to-ceiling windows that offer a sprawling billion-dollar view of the downtown skyline. The furniture is minimalist, the art is abstract, and the silence is so profound you can hear the hum of the bespoke refrigerator. It's a world of clean lines and quiet success. Right now, for instance, I was pacing the polished concrete floor, a phone pressed to my ear, a knot of tension tightening in my stomach that had nothing to do with the conversation. "No, Marcus, that's non-negotiable," I said, my voice calm and even, a stark contrast to the ballet of anxiety in my gut. Their seed investors can either accept a 10x return on the buyout, or they can watch the company fold when we launch our competitor. The choice is theirs, but the deadline is 5 p.m. Eastern. I stared out at the city, a glittering tapestry of ambition. I could see the tiny yellow cabs crawling along Canal Street, looking like bugs from my 30th floor perch. On the other end of the line, Marcus, my top acquisitions lawyer, was sputtering. "Chloe, this is aggressive. They're calling it hostile." "It's not hostile, it's business," I replied coolly. "We're offering them a golden parachute. Tell them to take it." I hung up, the silence of the loft rushing back in to fill the space. A moment later, my phone buzzed with a notification from my private bank. A direct deposit. My salary for the first half of the month, $75,000. It was just a number on a screen, but it represented a distance I couldn't even measure. A universe away from the leaky roof and secondhand clothes of my childhood in Ames, Iowa. A universe away from the girl who used to count pennies to see if she could afford a school lunch. That girl is still inside me, and she's terrified. She's the reason for the secret. I'd worked myself to the bone, clawed my way up through sheer force of will and an uncanny knack for seeing tech trends before they happened. I built my empire quietly, from nothing. But the wealth, it felt like a brand, a label that would eclipse everything else about me. I've seen it happen. Men get this weird gleam in their eye when they find out. They either become sycophantic, fawning over you in a way that makes your skin crawl, or they get insecure and competitive, trying to prove they're not intimidated. Either way, the person they see is no longer me. They see a walking, talking bank account, and that was my greatest fear, which is why Michael was my everything. The sound of his key turning in the lock was like a switch flipping inside me. The tension in my shoulders dissolved. The cold, calculating CEO persona melted away, and I was just Chloe again. He walked in, bringing the scent of chalk dust, old books, and the city streets with him. Michael was a high school history teacher. He was kind and handsome in a rumpled, intellectual way, with laugh lines around his eyes and a smile that could melt glaciers. "Hey, computer wizard," he said, dropping his worn leather satchel by the door. "Did you save the world from a digital apocalypse again?" I ran to him, wrapping my arms around his neck, burying my face in his sweater. It smelled like him. Safe. Something like that, I laughed, mostly just wrangling clients. One of them thinks the color beige is too aggressive. He believed I was a moderately successful freelance web designer. It wasn't a total lie. That's how I started out, making small websites for local businesses from my tiny apartment in Brooklyn. It's what I told him when we met at a coffee shop over a year ago, and I just never updated the story. The scale was different, that's all. Instead of designing a website for a bakery, I was now acquiring the software company that served 10,000 bakeries. In my world, it wasn't a huge leap. In his, it was another planet. He made about $60,000 a year, and he was passionate and fulfilled and the best man I'd ever known. He loved me for my scrappy independence, my creative eye, and the fact that I could still beat him at Mario Kart. He loved me, Chloe, the girl from Iowa, and I loved him more than I could possibly put into words. That night, after a quiet dinner of takeout Thai food eaten straight from the cartons on my ridiculously expensive Italian marble countertop, he got quiet. He took my hands, his thumb tracing circles over my knuckles. "Chloe," he started, his voice a little shaky. "This last year, it's been the best of my life. You make everything better. You make me better." He slid off the bar stool and knelt on one knee right there, on the concrete floor between the counter and the couch. My heart stopped. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. It wasn't a flashy, brand-name box. It looked old. "I know this place is yours," he said, gesturing around the vast, empty-feeling loft. "And I know you're the independent one, but I want to build a home with you, a real one, wherever we are. I want to argue about what to watch on TV and wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life." He opened the box. Inside was a simple, elegant platinum band with a small, perfect sapphire, the color of the sky just before dawn. It was understated, classic, and so incredibly me. Or at least, the me he knew. Tears sprang to my eyes, hot, happy tears. "Yes," I breathed, barely a whisper. "Michael, yes. 1,000 times yes." He slid the ring onto my finger, and it was a perfect fit. In that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the secret, not the millions, not the company. Just us. A week later, the bliss was still buzzing under my skin. We were talking about the future, and Michael brought up the one thing I'd been successfully avoiding. "We have to go to Chicago," he said, his face glowing with excitement. "My family is dying to finally meet my fiancée. My mom's already trying to plan an engagement party. Dad's probably researching your family tree." And that's when the idea sparked. A stupid, playful, terrible, brilliant idea. His family lived in Winnetka, one of the wealthiest suburbs of Chicago. Michael had grown up privileged, but he was completely removed from that world in his own mind. He was humble, almost to a fault. But I knew what families like that could be like. I'd seen it from the other side of the boardroom table. They valued lineage, connections, and what you brought to the family. This was it. This was the ultimate test. Not for Michael, but for them. "Okay," I told the version of myself in the mirror a few days later, holding up a simple, floral print sundress from the Gap. "You are Chloe. You're from a small town. You run a little web design business, helping local shops get online. You're sweet. You're a little naive. And you are madly in love with their son." I explained it to myself as a game, a little social experiment. I packed a suitcase devoid of anything with a visible designer label. I chose sensible flats over my Louboutins, a simple canvas tote instead of my Celine bag. I rehearsed my stories about growing up on a farm, a slight exaggeration. We lived near a few. About my quiet, simple life. I just wanted to know, for once and for all, that they would love me for the person I was. Not for the balance in my bank account. I needed to know that Michael's family was worthy of him. I wanted a warm, welcoming family that would hug me and tell me embarrassing stories about him as a kid. That's all I wanted. The flight to Chicago was filled with nervous excitement. Michael held my hand the whole way, oblivious to my internal monologue and the elaborate character I was about to play. We picked up a rental car at O'Hare and drove north. The city skyline slowly receded, replaced by the lush, green canopy of the North Shore suburbs. The houses grew larger, set further and further back from the road, on acres of perfectly manicured lawn. They weren't just houses. They were estates, mini castles of brick and stone with wrought iron gates and perfectly circular driveways. Michael turned onto his parents' street, and my stomach did a nervous flip. He pulled into the driveway of a stately, red-brick Georgian mansion that could have been on the cover of a magazine. It was beautiful, but in a cold, imposing way. "We're here," Michael chirped, an excited grin plastered on his face. He jumped out of the car, running around to open my door like the perfect gentleman he was. "Ready to meet the folks?" I took a deep breath, smoothing down my simple dress. Ready as I'll ever be. The front door, a massive slab of dark wood, swung open before we even reached it. A woman stood there, framed in the doorway. She was tall and slender, impeccably dressed in cream-colored linen trousers and a silk blouse, a string of pearls at her throat. Her blonde hair was coiffed into a helmet of perfection that looked like it wouldn't move in a hurricane. This had to be Eleanor. "Michael, darling," she said, her voice smooth as glass, but she didn't move to hug him. Her eyes flicked past her son and landed on me. And the game was over before it even began. Her eyes, cool, blue, and startlingly intelligent, didn't greet me. They scanned me. It was a swift, professional appraisal, starting at my sensible shoes, traveling up the length of my off-the-rack dress, noting the lack of a designer handbag, lingering for a microsecond on my simple sapphire ring, and finally meeting my eyes. In that single sweeping glance, I felt like I had been assessed, weighed, and found wanting. A younger, sharper version of Eleanor appeared at her shoulder. "Is this her?" she asked, not to me but to her mother. This must be the sister, Jessica. Her own gaze was even less forgiving, a quick, dismissive up and down that ended with a barely concealed smirk. She looked at me like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe. Michael, bless his oblivious heart, was beaming. "Mom, Jessica, this is Chloe. Chloe, my mom Eleanor, and my sister Jessica." Eleanor's lips curved into something that was technically a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. She extended a hand, and her grip was brief and cool. "It's so lovely to finally meet you, dear," she said, her tone dripping with a saccharine sweetness that felt more poisonous than outright hostility. "Michael has told us so much about you." I stepped over the threshold, a polite smile plastered on my face. The entryway was grand, with a sweeping staircase and a chandelier that probably cost more than my first car. A man with silver hair and a kind face, Michael's father, Robert, I presumed, came forward and gave me a firm, polite handshake. But the welcome felt hollow. The air inside the house wasn't warm and inviting. It was thick with a chilling, unspoken judgment. The warm, loving family I had imagined dissolved into a mirage. This wasn't a home. It was a showroom. And as I stood there, in my simple, country girl costume, under the cold, appraising stare of Michael's mother, I realized my little game had just turned into a battle for survival, and I'd walked onto the field completely unarmed. That first dinner was set up like a scene from a movie about old money. The dining room was cavernous, with a dark wood table buffed to a mirror shine, reflecting the cold light of a crystal chandelier. The silverware felt heavy and important in my hands, and every time I set my water glass down on the crisp linen placemat, the sound seemed to echo in the crushing silence. Michael, bless his heart, sat beside me, squeezing my hand under the table, completely oblivious. He thought this was just a normal family dinner. I knew, from the moment we'd walked in, that it was a tribunal. The interrogation began between the chilled cucumber soup and the main course of roasted duck. It was led, of course, by Eleanor. She dabbed her lips with a napkin, a gesture that looked delicate, but felt like a judge sharpening a pencil before delivering a verdict. "So, Chloe," she began, her voice smooth as silk, but with an edge of something sharp underneath. "Michael tells us you grew up in Iowa. How quaint. It must be so very different from city life." She said quaint the way a biologist might describe a peculiar insect. "It is, yes," I replied, keeping my voice soft and my gaze demure. I had practiced this. It's much quieter, lots of open space. I gave a small, self-deprecating smile. More corn than people, that's for sure. Jessica, Michael's sister, chimed in with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "And you have your own little web design business? That's just adorable. Is that more of a passion project, or do you find it keeps you busy?" The implication was clear. Do you actually make any real money with your little computer hobby? "It keeps me very busy," I said, looking her straight in the eye for a brief moment before dropping my gaze back to my plate. "I have a few steady clients. It's enough." Enough. The word hung in the air, pathetic and small. In her world, enough was a synonym for failure. To me, it was the perfect camouflage. They exchanged a look, Eleanor and Jessica, a flash of understanding so quick I would have missed it if I wasn't looking for it. It was a look of pity mixed with confirmation, as if I'd just proven their lowest expectations. Michael's father, Robert, who had been silent up to this point, finally cleared his throat. He had the kind of stoic, hard-lined face of a man who'd spent his life evaluating risk and finding others wanting. The conversation shifted, steered by Robert, to his home turf, the market. He started talking about portfolio diversification, about the recent volatility in the tech sector. He spoke with the easy authority of a man who never had to doubt his own importance. Michael just listened, nodding along, having heard these lectures his whole life. "The whole NASDAQ is skittish," Robert was saying, swirling the contents of his glass. "But the real bloodbath is in biotech. Those speculative gene therapy startups are getting hammered. Take Atherigen, for example. Dropped 15 points since Monday, a total wipeout for anyone who bought in last quarter." And that's when I slipped. The muscle memory from 1,000 board meetings and analyst calls just took over. I forgot I was Chloe, the simple girl from Iowa. For 1 second, I was just Chloe, the CEO who had sunk 7 figures into that very stock. "Atherigen's fundamentals are solid," I said, the words leaving my mouth before I could stop them. "Their Phase 2 trial data was exceptional." The drop is a market overreaction to their main competitor, Biovantra, failing its FDA review last week. It's a classic case of sector-wide panic. Smart money is buying the dip right now, not selling. The silence that fell over the table was instant and absolute. It was heavier than before, charged with a new kind of energy. I could feel Michael's confusion next to me. Robert's fork paused halfway to his mouth, and he stared at me, his mask of bored superiority cracking for the first time. But it was Jessica who pounced. Her eyes narrowed, gleaming with suspicion. "Well, that's a remarkably specific thing to know for a freelance web designer from Iowa," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Where did you say you went to college again?" My heart hammered against my ribs. Stupid, stupid, stupid. I forced a nervous laugh, making my cheeks flush. "Oh my gosh, you're going to think I'm such a nerd," I said, waving my hand dismissively. "I don't know anything about stocks, really. I saw an article about it on a tech blog I follow for work. Something about a market dip? I probably got all the details wrong. It just sounded vaguely familiar." I looked down at my lap, trying to project embarrassment and insecurity. "Please, don't listen to me. I have no idea what I'm talking about." It was a clumsy save, but it seemed to work. Robert gave a short, condescending chuckle and went back to his duck. "An article, yes. Well, leave the investing to the experts, young lady." But the seed was planted. I could feel it. Jessica didn't look away. She watched me for the rest of the meal, a tiny, smug smile playing on her lips. She knew I was lying. She just didn't know why. The rest of the weekend was a masterclass in psychological warfare disguised as hospitality. They suffocated me with their status. At breakfast on Saturday, Eleanor lamented the difficulty of finding a good caterer for their annual Polo Club fundraiser. Jessica complained that her upcoming trip to Monaco might be ruined if she had to socialize with the new money crowd, who she claimed had no taste, and bought the biggest yachts but didn't even know who to hire for the crew. Every conversation was peppered with the names of influential friends, powerful business partners, and exclusive vacation spots. I was meant to sit there, wide-eyed and impressed. Instead, a cold knot of disgust tightened in my stomach. I watched how they treated Michael. They loved him, that much was clear. But it was the love one has for a prized, beautiful, but slightly dim-witted show dog. He was their charming, handsome history teacher son, an asset who brought them social credit for his humble career choice, but who absolutely had to marry correctly to secure the family legacy. They would gently steer his conversations away from his passion for the Civil War and towards Jessica's friend who just got accepted to Harvard Law, or Robert's golf buddy who was considering a run for Congress. They were polishing their asset, making sure he still reflected their light. The pressure finally culminated on Saturday afternoon. I had escaped to the back patio, needing a moment to just breathe air that didn't smell of expensive perfume and quiet judgment. The sprawling, manicured lawn stretched out before me, a perfect green carpet untouched by human hands. I heard the sliding glass door open and close behind me. I didn't have to turn around to know it was Jessica. She came to stand beside me, not looking at me but out at the garden. For a moment, we just stood in silence. "My brother is a good man," she said finally, her voice low and completely devoid of the fake warmth she used in front of Michael. "He's kind. He sees the best in everyone, which is an admirable quality, but it also makes him a target." She turned to face me, her arms crossed. Her eyes were cold, analytical. "I don't know what your game is," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "The simple country girl act? It's a little thin, but let me be perfectly clear. My brother has a legacy to uphold. This family has a legacy. We're just making sure he doesn't make a choice he'll regret." She took a step closer, her presence invasive. "So whatever story you're selling, it had better be real. Because if it's not, I promise you, we will find out. And it would be so much easier for everyone, especially you, if you just walked away now before things get complicated." She held my gaze for another long, chilling second, then turned and walked back inside, leaving me alone in the sterile perfection of the backyard. My hands were trembling, but not from fear. It was rage. A cold, quiet fury was replacing the hurt and the anxiety. My initial playful motive, to be liked for myself, felt laughably naive now. This was never a game about love or acceptance. For them, it was about assets and liabilities. It was a transaction. Jessica hadn't just insulted me, she had thrown down a gauntlet. My little test had morphed into something else entirely. It had become a grim determination to see just how far this family would push. "Fine," I thought, the anger solidifying into a block of ice in my chest. "Go ahead. Let's see how far you're willing to go, because I can promise you, I'm willing to go much, much further." The breaking point came on Sunday. The sun, which had been hiding behind a curtain of gray Chicago clouds all weekend, finally broke through, streaming into the glass-walled sunroom where brunch was being held. It was also painfully picturesque. A long table draped in white linen, tiny crystal vases holding single, perfect white tulips, and an array of catered food that probably cost more than my parents' first car. Mini quiches, smoked salmon blinis, fruit tarts glistening under a sugar glaze. The air smelled of expensive coffee and lilies. Michael's family had invited a few of their dearest friends to meet me, an older couple, the Prestons, who looked like carbon copies of Robert and Eleanor, he in a crisp navy blazer, she in a cream-colored cashmere twin set, and their daughter, a woman my age with a law degree from Yale, and a diamond on her finger the size of a pigeon's egg. The polite, third-degree questioning from the night before was now a team sport. Every smile felt like a bared-teeth threat. Every question about my little life was a trap designed to highlight my insignificance. I was playing my part, meek and mild, offering soft smiles and vague answers. I let them believe I was dazzled by their world, by the casual way they discussed wintering in St. Bart's, and the hassle of getting the new Maserati serviced. Inside, the playful spirit of my little game had long since curdled into a cold, hard knot in my stomach. I was watching Michael, seeing him navigate his family's suffocating snobbery with an almost childlike innocence. He'd laugh at his father's jokes, placate his mother, and squeeze my hand under the table, completely oblivious to the venom being directed at me. He didn't see it because it was the water he'd been swimming in his whole life. He thought it was normal. The final, fatal blow wasn't loud. It wasn't a dramatic shout, it was a whisper. A carefully projected stage whisper designed to carry. Eleanor, her face a mask of grave concern, pulled Michael away from the table toward the French doors that led to the perfectly manicured garden. She placed a manicured hand on his arm, positioning him so his back was mostly to me, but she had a clear line of sight. She wanted to watch my face as the arrow hit. "Michael, darling, you have to be practical," she began, her voice dripping with counterfeit maternal love. I kept my eyes fixed on the pastry in front of me, pretending to be absorbed in its flaky layers, but my hearing had gone telescopic. Every other sound in the room, the clinking of forks, the low hum of conversation, faded into a dull roar. This girl, she continued, the words sharp and clear. She is sweet, I'll grant you that. But she brings nothing to the table. Think about it. She has no connections, no means. Her family is, well, you know. She will be a drain on you, Michael, on this family. A drain. The word echoed in the sudden, silent chamber of my mind. All my life I had worked, clawed, and fought my way up from nothing, promising myself I would never, ever be a burden on anyone. And here was this woman, who'd never known a day of real struggle, branding me a parasite. Michael started to protest, his voice a low, confused murmur. "Mom, that's not fair, I love her." But Eleanor cut him off, her voice gaining a steely edge. "Love doesn't pay for the life you deserve, for your children's future. For God's sake, call it off. Be a man about it. We'll even give her a generous check, of course, to help with her transition." That was it, the check. The idea that she could buy my dignity, pay for my silence, swat me away like a fly with a wad of cash. Something inside me didn't just snap, it vaporized. The simple, wide-eyed girl from Iowa, the one I had so carefully constructed, dissolved into thin air. A strange glacial calm washed over me, so potent it felt like a superpower. The hurt, the humiliation, the simmering rage, it all transmuted into a cold, diamond-hard fury. My hands, which had been trembling slightly, were now perfectly still. I pushed my chair back, the sound scraping softly against the polished hardwood floor. All eyes turned to me. I walked over to them, my footsteps unnaturally quiet. Michael looked bewildered, his mouth half open. Eleanor watched me with a cruel, triumphant glint in her eyes. She thought I was coming to plead, to cry. I stopped a few feet away and looked directly at her. My voice, when it came out, was unrecognizable to my own ears. It was low, steady, and utterly devoid of emotion. "But check won't be necessary, Mrs. Collins." I pulled out my phone. The sleek black rectangle felt like a weapon in my hand. Michael's brow furrowed in confusion. Jessica, who had been watching from the table with a smug smirk, leaned forward. I found the number in my contacts and pressed it, then hit the speakerphone button. The room was so quiet that the electronic chime of the call connecting sounded like a siren. Marcus, a brisk, professional voice answered on the second ring. "Marcus, hi." "It's Chloe," I said, my gaze never leaving Eleanor's face, which was just beginning to shift from arrogance to uncertainty. "Chloe, good morning, what's up?" "Regarding the bid for the Atherton building downtown," I said, keeping my tone level. I saw Robert, Michael's father, freeze mid-sip of his coffee. "Yes?" Marcus prompted. "The sellers are holding firm on their price. They think we're bluffing." "Triple it," I said. A beat of stunned silence on the other end of the line, then, Chloe, did you say triple it? That's an astronomical figure. We'll be overpaying by 9 figures. "I'm aware," I said calmly, "and make the offer contingent on the current board being dissolved. Yes, all of them. I'm buying them out. Send the revised offer within the hour." From across the room there was a sharp clang. Robert's coffee cup had slipped from his hand, shattering on its saucer. His face, which had been ruddy with self-satisfaction moments before, was now the color of ash. His jaw hung open. It took me a split second to connect the dots. Of course, the Atherton building. Robert was on the board. "Consider it done," Marcus said, the shock in his voice replaced by the thrill of the kill. "I'll email you the confirmation." I ended the call with a decisive tap of my thumb and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Then I let my eyes sweep over the wreckage. Jessica was pale, her mouth a perfect O of horrified disbelief. Robert looked like he was having a heart attack. And Eleanor looked as if I had physically struck her. The mask of superiority had shattered, revealing the ugly, grasping panic beneath. I turned my focus back to her, the architect of her own ruin. "You were worried I'd be a financial liability?" I asked, the words quiet but carrying the force of a landslide. "Mrs. Collins, my personal income last month could have bought this house. Twice, with change to spare for a new Maserati. I let that sink in, watching the comprehension dawn on their faces. I finally gave them the truth, and it was more brutal than any lie I had told. "This weekend," I said, my voice dropping even lower, "this whole thing wasn't a test to see if I was good enough for your family. The game was to see if you were good enough for Michael." I held Eleanor's gaze for one last, searing moment. "You failed." The silence that fell over the brunch was nothing like the quiet of my Soho loft. This wasn't peaceful. It was a vacuum, a physical presence that sucked the air from the room and pressed down on my shoulders. I felt the weight of 20 pairs of eyes, a mix of the family's close friends and the Collins clan themselves, all staring as if I had just sprouted a second head. The clink of a fork being dropped onto a porcelain plate sounded like a gunshot. Eleanor stood frozen, her hand still resting on Michael's arm, her face a mask of utter devastation. The smug, condescending matriarch had vanished, replaced by a ghost. Her perfectly coiffed silver hair seemed to wilt, her designer dress suddenly looking like a costume on a woman who had just been publicly undressed. Jessica's reaction was almost more satisfying. The perpetual smirk was gone, wiped clean. Her face, which had been alight with vicious triumph just moments before, was now a shocking, chalky white. She looked small, humiliated, her eyes darting between me, her mother, and her father, searching for a script that didn't exist. And then there was Robert. His face was a thundercloud of mottled red and purple. His jaw was working silently, grinding his teeth as the full weight of my words, and my call to Marcus, landed on him. I'm buying them out. The Atherton building. His board. The project he'd been boasting about all weekend. The one he considered his legacy project in retirement. I hadn't just revealed my wealth. I had, with a single 60-second phone call, dismantled his professional standing in front of his closest friends. He looked like he was having trouble breathing, his chest rising and falling in shallow, furious puffs. But I wasn't looking at them. Not really. My eyes were on Michael. He stood between his mother and me, a statue in the midst of the wreckage. His face was a canvas of pure, unadulterated shock. His mouth was slightly open, his blue eyes wide as he stared at me, then at his phone-clutching hand, then back at my face. He wasn't looking at me with admiration or relief. He was looking at me like I was a stranger. The game was over. The satisfaction I thought I'd feel, the righteous vindication, it wasn't there. All I felt was a cold, hollow ache. This wasn't a victory, it was just a mess. Breaking the spell, I took a steadying breath. My voice, when it came out, was quiet but firm, cutting through the thick silence. "I'm sorry you had to see that, Michael," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. I was sorry he had to see his family for who they really were. I was sorry I was the one who had to pull back the curtain. I didn't wait for a response from anyone. The pretense was gone. I walked back to the chair where I'd left my simple, unassuming canvas tote bag, the one I'd bought at a farmer's market for $20 as a prop. I slipped my phone inside, slung the strap over my shoulder, and turned toward the grand, arched doorway I had entered only 2 days ago. I could feel Michael's eyes on my back, but he didn't move, he didn't speak. I walked out of the dining room, my sensible flats making no sound on the thick oriental rugs. I didn't run. I walked with a deliberate, steady pace, through the marble-floored foyer and out the heavy oak door, into the crisp Chicago air. The sun was bright, the street was quiet, lined with perfectly manicured lawns and towering oak trees. It was the picture of suburban tranquility, a brutal contrast to the emotional war zone I had just left behind. I was halfway down the long, winding cobblestone driveway when I heard the front door slam open behind me. "Chloe!" It was Michael's voice. A wave of relief, so potent it almost buckled my knees, washed over me. Of course, he was coming. He'd seen them, he'd heard them. Now we could leave. Now we could finally be us. I stopped and turned, a real, genuine smile finally starting to form on my lips. "Michael, thank God. Let's just go. We can get in the car and just drive." But the words died in my throat. The look on his face wasn't one of solidarity, it wasn't relief. His handsome features were twisted into a mask of pain and anger I had never seen before. He stalked toward me, his movements jerky and unfamiliar. Go, he repeated, his voice dangerously low. Go where, Chloe? Back to your simple life in New York? Or should I say, back to your throne in your Soho loft from which you buy and sell entire buildings on a whim? The accusation hit me like a slap. Michael, that's not fair. Not fair? He laughed, a short, bitter sound that held no humor. You want to talk about what's not fair? I have spent the last year falling in love with a woman I thought was a freelance web designer who grew up on a farm and was just making her way. A woman I loved for her kindness, her humor, her heart. He stopped a few feet from me, his chest heaving. Was any of that real? Or was it all just part of the little game? His words were daggers. Of course it was real. Everything between us was real, I pleaded, taking a step toward him. He instinctively took a step back, and the small movement broke my heart more than anything his mother had said. The game wasn't for you. It was for them. I had to know, Michael. I had to know they loved me for me, not for... I trailed off, gesturing vaguely with my hands. For all of that. For all of what? For who you actually are? He shot back, his voice rising. You didn't trust me, Chloe. That's what this comes down to. You didn't trust me enough to tell me the single biggest thing about your life. I proposed to a woman I apparently don't even know. That's not true. You know my heart. You know who I am inside. I could feel tears starting to well up, hot and frustrated. Did you hear what your mother said? She called me a drain. She wanted to write me a check, Michael, to pay me off to leave you. What was I supposed to do? Just sit there and take it? No, what you were supposed to do was tell me the truth a year ago, he yelled, the sound echoing unnervingly in the quiet street. A curtain twitched in the window of the house across the way. I spent this whole weekend defending you, telling them they were wrong, telling them they didn't see the amazing woman I saw. I felt like such an idiot, standing up for this simple country girl while you were sitting on a secret big enough to ruin my father. You didn't just play a game with them, Chloe. You played a game with me. You made me a pawn in it. My entire relationship, our engagement, it's all been based on a lie. The truth of his words hit me with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't wrong. In my quest to protect myself, to test his family, I had inadvertently built the foundation of our future on deceit. I had been so focused on their potential betrayal that I had never considered my own. I stared at him, my own anger and justification deflating, replaced by a deep, gut-wrenching sorrow. Michael, I whispered, my voice breaking, I am so sorry. I never, ever wanted to hurt you. Please, just come with me. We can fix this. I'll tell you everything. No more secrets. I reached for his hand. He looked down at my outstretched hand and then back at my face, and his expression was one of profound, soul-deep betrayal. He shook his head slowly. I can't, he said, his voice now flat and devoid of emotion. I can't go with you. I need to think. I don't even know what's real anymore. He turned his back on me and started walking back toward the house, back toward the family that had just tried to buy me off. Michael, no! Don't go back in there with them, I cried out, desperation clawing at my throat. He stopped at the foot of the stairs leading to the front door but didn't turn around. They're my family, Chloe. As awful as they were today, they're my family. And you lied to me for over a year. I don't know which is worse. And with that, he walked up the steps, opened the heavy oak door and disappeared inside, leaving me standing alone in the middle of the perfect street, the perfect life I had just blown apart. The silence that returned was heavier than before, filled with the weight of his final words. I stood there for a full minute, frozen, hoping the door would open again. It didn't. Finally, numbly, I turned and walked to my rental car. The sanitized, generic smell of the interior filled my lungs. I got in, started the engine, and drove away without looking back. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to go back, to hammer on that door and fight for him. But what would I even say? He was right. I drove for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 20 minutes, before pulling over in a deserted corner of a strip mall parking lot. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking. I didn't call Michael, I called Marcus. Change of plans, I said, my voice hoarse. Book the jet. I'm coming back to New York tonight. And Marcus? "Book me the largest suite at the Carlisle. I don't think I can go home just yet." As I hung up, I looked at my reflection in the dark screen of my phone. I had won my little game. I had exposed the Collins family for the shallow, transactional people they were. But in the process, I had proven Michael right. I had lied. I had manipulated. And now I was alone, heading back to a city of 8 million people, to an empty hotel suite and a cavernous loft that suddenly felt less like a triumph and more like a beautifully minimalist cage. I had successfully protected my fortune, but it seemed I had lost the only thing that had ever made me feel truly rich. The flight back to New York was a blur. The usual thrill of seeing the Manhattan skyline appear through the clouds was gone, replaced by a hollow ache in my chest that no amount of success or money could fill. My Soho loft, which had always felt like a sanctuary, a fortress of my own making, now felt like a gilded cage. The minimalist furniture, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the acres of polished concrete floors, it all seemed to echo with the silence Michael had left behind. For the first time, my home felt empty, unbearably so. A week passed in a muted haze, a week of painful, deafening silence. The world outside kept moving. Deals were being proposed. My team was handling the fallout from my Atherton Building bomb, but I was stuck. I'd go through the motions, answering emails with a detached efficiency, but my mind was replaying that afternoon in Winnetka on a loop. I saw the look of utter betrayal on Michael's face. This wasn't a game. This was a lie. His words were shards of glass in my memory, and they cut deeper than any of his family's insults. Because he was right. My little game had started as a self-preservation tactic, a test to see if his family was worthy of him. But in my arrogance, in my deep-seated fear of being wanted for my money, I had failed to consider the most important person in the equation. I hadn't trusted Michael. I had built a wall around my heart so high that I hadn't even let my own fiancé see the real me. I had treated him like a variable in my experiment, not the partner I was supposed to be building a life with. The realization was a bitter pill to swallow. I sat on my oversized gray couch, staring at the phone, my thumb hovering over his contact. But what could I even say? He had been right to be angry. He had been right to stay behind. His family, on the other hand, had been blowing up his phone and through him, trying to get to me. My sources told me Robert Collins was in a full-blown panic. My casual, 3-word command to my fixer, Marcus, had sent shockwaves through their little world. The bid was real, the buyout was aggressive, and Robert's position on the Atherton board, a cushy sinecure he used for bragging rights at the country club, was about to evaporate. I felt a flicker of grim satisfaction, but it was quickly extinguished by the overwhelming sadness. I hadn't wanted to ruin them. I had just wanted them to be decent people. Sunday night, exactly 1 week after I'd walked out of their lives, my intercom buzzed. I ignored it. I wasn't expecting anyone. It buzzed again, more insistently this time. With a sigh, I walked over to the panel, my heart thumping with a strange mix of dread and hope. When I pressed the video button, my breath caught in my throat. It was Michael. He looked tired, his shoulders slumped, his handsome face etched with an exhaustion that mirrored my own. I buzzed him in without a word. The seconds it took for the elevator to travel up to my penthouse floor felt like an eternity. What was he doing here? Was he here to officially end things? To collect his things from the drawer I'd cleared for him in my bedroom? My mind raced with catastrophic possibilities. The elevator chimed and I opened my front door. He just stood there for a moment in the hallway, holding a single, small overnight bag. We looked at each other, 2 people standing on opposite sides of a chasm we had both helped create. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice hoarse. I just nodded, stepping back to let him pass. The cavernous space of my living room seemed to swallow him whole. He walked to the center of the room and put his bag down, turning to face me. "My family," he started, then stopped, shaking his head as if the words were distasteful. "They haven't stopped calling. My mother thinks if she apologizes enough, you'll call off the buyout. My father is threatening legal action, though for what, I have no idea. And Jessica, she sent me a text saying I should be grateful to her for exposing you." I flinched. "Michael, Let me finish," he said, holding up a hand. It wasn't an angry gesture, just a weary one. I spent the last week in that house, listening to them. And I realized something. I wasn't just mad at you, Chloe. I was ashamed, deeply, profoundly ashamed of them.
And of myself. He took a step closer. "My first reaction was to be angry at your lie, because it was easier than being horrified by their truth. For my whole life, I've known what they were. I knew they were obsessed with status, with money, with appearances. I just told myself it was normal. I told myself their love for me was unconditional. But it's not. It's all transactional. Everything is a deal. And when you showed up, a simple girl from the countryside, you broke the terms of their deal." Tears pricked my eyes. This was not the conversation I had expected. "Your game was wrong," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "It was deceptive, and it hurt me more than I can say. But I get it now. I get why you did it. You were trying to find something real, something my family knows nothing about." He looked around my vast, beautiful, empty apartment.
And I almost lost the one real thing in my life because I was so focused on the lie that I didn't want to see the ugly truth it exposed. I finally let the tears fall, a quiet stream down my cheeks. "I'm so sorry, Michael," I whispered, my voice breaking. "You're right, it was a lie. I was so scared of being seen as a bank account that I didn't trust the one person who ever saw me as just Chloe. I was wrong. I should have told you everything from the very beginning. I'm sorry I didn't trust you." He closed the distance between us, his hands coming up to cup my face, his thumbs gently wiping away my tears. "I'm sorry, too, for not defending you in that moment, for letting my shock and my hurt at the lie overshadow their cruelty." We stood there in the quiet of my loft, just holding each other. It wasn't a passionate Hollywood kiss, but something far more profound. It was a silent acknowledgement of the wreckage, and a shared, unspoken promise to rebuild. Later, we sat on the couch, side by side this time, close enough that our arms were touching. We talked for hours, the most honest and difficult conversation of our lives. I told him everything, about growing up in Iowa with barely enough to get by, about the scholarship to Stanford that changed my life, about the early years of grinding and hustling, and about the fear that came with the fortune I'd built. He, in turn, told me about the suffocating pressure of being a Collins, the constant expectation to marry well and to live a life that looked good on paper, even if it was empty inside. "So, what now?" I asked quietly, dreading the answer. Michael took my hand. "No big wedding," he said, his voice full of a new, calm certainty. "No more trying to please anyone. No guest lists, no seating charts, no Eleanor whispering in my ear about what's practical." He squeezed my hand. "I don't want their legacy, Chloe. I want to build our own." A slow smile spread across my face, the first genuine smile in a week. "What are you thinking?" He grinned back, the old playful light returning to his eyes. "I'm thinking an elopement. Just you and me. Somewhere far away from New York and Chicago. Somewhere nobody knows our names or what's in our bank accounts. We can go to a courthouse, find a beach, whatever we want. What matters is the promise, not the party." I leaned my head on his shoulder, a feeling of profound peace settling over me. The game was over. The lies were gone. All that was left was the truth. He pulled out his laptop and together we started looking up flights, not to Monaco or some other status symbol destination, but to small, quiet places where we could just be us. In the warm glow of the screen, with the city lights twinkling outside my window, I knew we had found our way back. We weren't just a couple anymore. We were a team, real, honest, and stronger than ever.